Welcome to the My Rules Are Better podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet, and today I have the pleasure of chatting with Chris Abbott once again. I should have probably said this evening I have the pleasure of chatting with Chris Abbott once again. Chris, since you were last on, you now have an email address for people that want to get in contact with you directly.
Yes. Thanks for the suggestion, actually.
So rpgfan@bell, bell.net will get you straight in contact with Mr. Chris Abbott.
Yep, and I'll try to answer as soon as I can if anybody has any questions, or just we can maybe start a discussion.
So, since our last chat, I went to Drive Through RPG. I downloaded both the advanced and the deluxe revised recon rules, a bunch of Palladium books featuring Australia. Also picked up Unearthed Arcana, which I guess I had contact with that at some time. I remember probably even prior to my teens, maybe thumbing through a copy of it. The Thief Acrobat, I think, sticks in my mind more than anything. Is that a book that you played with? Is that something that you put into your rule set when you played D&D?
When Unearthed Arcana was actually printed, it was mostly a compendium of information that had already appeared in Dragon Magazine. And we had adopted a number of things in Dragon Magazine already into our game. But I don't think by the time it was actually physically published that we had purchased it for any particular reason. We already had the information we wanted, I suppose. And it's interesting to note that the original print of Unearthed Arcana got a lot of heat from some of the players and GMs because the material as presented seemed to break the game in some way. For instance, they had removed a lot of the restrictions on different races playing certain classes, like now you have Dwarven Cleric and stuff like that, which really changed the power balance. I mean, there were things that you couldn't do reasonably in first edition as written because the only mages that could reach high levels and do the amazing spells like Gate and Wish and, dimensional shifting were human, and humans had a fixed lifespan, very short. If you started off as a human mage, you could end up being something like 40 years old to begin with, which you were close to middle age, which would have a negative stat impact. So if you were trying to cast heavy spells, you had aging 3 years, 5 years, 1 year. A high-level human mage is not going to just cast a wish spell for somebody because they're going to age 5 years when they do it. So there were all sorts of decisions that you would have to make in terms of power and availability of spells. And if you wanted a powerful spell like that cast, you went to somebody and you negotiated. They wanted a special artifact in exchange for this huge risk to their life. And then you'd have to go adventuring for that. But apparently there were a number of errata compiled for Unearthed Arcana, but never made it into the initial print runs. So the only way you can get a revised Unearthed Arcana is to buy the premium reprint that Wizards of the Coast put out a few years ago with the gilt edge paper. Of course, since I foolishly in the past got rid of all my first edition books, along with a bunch of first edition modules, including the monochrome cover ones, which apparently, I ended up buying a premium reprint of each of the core books plus the Unearthed Arcana, and then I was gifted a very nice, clean copy of Deities and Demigods, the Cthulhu and Melnibone mythos in it, for which I am very grateful. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of the other material for it, but yeah, UA has a lot of good stuff in it that we adopted. Let's put it that way. That's the sum total of the sentence. We just didn't do it officially with the book. We did it piecemeal from the. You said you went to Drive Through RPG.
Drive Through RPG has everything. I mean, in terms of the first edition rules, it seems to have a full slate. I mean, I'm not sure what version they're actually printing from that, but it looked pretty coherent for me.
I think the last, if you're getting the PDFs, they would be the last edition, last print of each of the books. They've done it for first edition and second edition as well. So if you want the revised Player's Handbook, the revised DMG from second edition, you can pick it up there. But I just wanted to first of all, you were mentioning something in the last episode about a third book in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles sort of series, Roadhogs, and I don't think you mentioned After the Bomb, which might be the you were looking for.
Yes. Well, after the bomb, Mutants of the Yucatan, Mutants Down Under. But yes, after the bomb, I think may have had some Australian references in it. I can't recall, but I think certainly that rule set was just so fascinating. And when I picked it up again, I had a recollection that it was like disturbingly violent and really almost not pornographic, but that kind of that element that was really part of the 1985 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle books had been explored to a great depth through the role-playing game. And I remember when I first picked it up as a kid, I was kind of a bit transfixed by how dark it really was.
Well, the original comics were quite violent. I mean, the Turtles and Casey Jones, they knocked the crap out of people. It wasn't, the cleaned up Mother Goose style of combat. It was Brothers Grimm.
Certainly. But I think Sabita took that even further. I think the kinds of there were torture scenes in some of the books, which I remember as a child just looking at with some kind of dismay. But certainly going back as an adult and seeing the same torture scenes, I thought to myself, this is really very curious that this was part of this role-playing game. But it was a darker, I think that was the distinction, because certainly by the early 90s and the films, the Turtles had rebranded themselves as you say, kind of kids' toys and this kind of stuff. So there was certainly an artistic direction that Sabita and, the other folk that wrote for the Turtles in the role-playing game sense took. And I thought it was, compared to certainly Robotech and a lot of I don't know, I didn't really get into Rifts enough to get a sense of that. But there was something really quite dark and nasty in the Turtles role-playing game, which, anyway.
There were a lot of products that came out at the time that were pushing various corners of the envelope that had been formerly round and sort of softened. So speaking of PDFs, are you aware of organizations or offerings from Humble Bundle or Bundle of Holding?
No, I'm not.
Oh, I shouldn't have told you then.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I apologize in advance.
Very good.
Humble Bundle is a website that offers periodic deals on groups of PDFs, and they cover gaming, they cover digital photography, they cover programming, they cover then they go into actual physical software, real software. So there's game bundles with classic games and new games that are well, this century at least. And I picked up several collections there from Frog God Games, Kobold Press, and Lone Shark, which cover a whole bunch of supplementary material for D&D 5th edition, and also books on game design, game theory, puzzles, all sorts of things that I could incorporate into RPGs. But the one that's going to really hurt your pocketbook is from Bundle of Holding, and they've been going on for several years now. I've picked up virtually complete collections of Space 1889, Palladium Fantasy RPG, which includes the core rules, the 2 through 7 books for supplements, the Arms of Nargashtor, the Judge's Screen, and Cardboard Heroes style figures, a full Lamentations of the Flame Princess bundle, the Dark Eye, which is a English translation of a German RPG that started out in 1984 time frame, full Mutant Year Zero, which is a newer product from Modifius, including GenLab Alpha, which is their anthropomorphic animals mutant section, and the editions 1 through 3 of Early Champions. And these bundles are typically, 10, 12, 14 books for maybe $20, $25 US.
Okay.
And you can get these deals. They come up every month or so. They're online regularly, and I look at the list of the ones I've missed and sort of regret missing out on them, but they'll come around again in another year or so. They'll probably add a couple more titles to the bundle and reoffer it.
So one of the topics we didn't get to reach last discussion was associated with writing your own rules, house rules, and house adventures. And it's interesting that you make this distinction, because certainly I think let's start with house rules. Because house rules, for me, are even outside of role-playing games, board games, any kind of game, house rules for me are just really, really critical. And it's interesting because I was thinking back at all, and certainly when one gets married, one occasionally plays board games with one's spouse. Maybe it could be an Australian thing, I'm not sure. But from your perspective, can you talk a little bit about house rules in role-playing games?
Probably the first example when I first sat down and we were told we were going to generate characters was the DM that was there insisted it was 3d6 rolled once in order, and that was how you're going to generate your character. And it wasn't until we had our own copies of the Player's Handbook and the DMG that we found that there were other options, including 46 drop the lowest and arrange them as you like, which is what we eventually adopted. Although I do like the new 5th edition point buy methodology for generating characters, because at the outset you cannot have a stat above 17, which I think is okay. Now, what we did in early days is we learned about critical hits. You know, if you roll a natural 20, it's not just an automatic hit. It's a hit and you do double damage. We just had the double damage. We did maximum damage. There wasn't even a doubling effect. It was just maximum damage. So you automatically, if you were hitting with a longsword, you did D8 plus your strength. So you got maybe 11 or 12 damage right off the bat. And it wasn't until later editions came out that talked about critical doubling of damage and doubling the first die and stuff like that. I heard a really interesting one that came up the other day. They were talking about using an escalation die during combat. So you'd put a D6 down on the table after the first round. The first round of combat was straight. Everything was as written in your character sheets and the rules. The second round of combat, you turned up the first pip on the D6, and everybody got a +1 bonus to hit in the second round. And the third round, you rolled it to the 2 pips, and everybody got a +2 to hit. So basically what you're doing is you're shortening up all these combats that can go hours and hours and hours, because by the 7th round, everybody's got +6 to hit.
But that seems to be counterintuitive to the way a battle would really be played. Like, that maximizes the fun, but that doesn't account for exhaustion and various other things.
Well, exactly. But here, now I'm going to step on your toes.
Okay.
Step on your toes here, because I'm going to delve into your bailiwick here. Every combat system, every rule system by itself is an abstraction.
Certainly.
You're not looking at the what's really happening. You're in your case, you'd know this. You create parameters that you then simulate some events or effects. So every combat system is an abstraction, and D&D is arguably one of the worst abstractions of a combat system, because it's hit points and armor class. It's how difficult it is for you to hit somebody, and then how much damage do you take. If you had 90 hit points and you're full strength and you're battling away, you're the same level of effectiveness all the way down to 1 hit point. You're still hitting full strength and full dexterity and full everything, and you can keep going. As long as nobody takes that last hit point away, you're still alive and still active.
Yes.
And that's nuts.
Yes.
Because the longer you go, the more tired you become, the less strong the blows you make, the harder it is for you to get through somebody's guard, and the weaker you feel. But we don't simulate that for the most part, because people don't like that. It's not fun. I think it's fun. I am the tyrant of fun. I love things like that. I love keeping track of stuff like that, but most people don't. So the escalation die is a way to get through the tedium by making it progressively more easy to finish off your opponent. And while I don't necessarily like that methodology, I can see why a lot of people would like to adopt it, to shorten up, especially in something like 4th edition D&D, where you get into combat and 8 hours later you're still in combat.
Certainly. Yes.
Battle. But that's an example of a house rule that people are adopting in order to streamline portions of the game that don't necessarily appeal to them.
I mean, from my perspective, what I would like to see is a certain amount of strategy early on, which I think is something that I've used the Just Plain Chaos rule set as a means of getting a discussion going about these kind of things. But in Just Plain Chaos and RuneQuest and these kind of games, because your health is put over your entire body in various locations, if you're struck in the arm or the leg or, the chest or the head, there are various deficiencies that occur through combat which reduce your ability. So you have to be strategic coming into combat, associated with finding the biggest, baddest, and doing what needs to be done to them, And strategically also, those with ranged weapons, the sneaky ones also need to be thought of here. And I think what's interesting is that so many of these things are, as you say, a reaction to D&D. D&D was the initial introduction. It may have been the first gateway into this realm. But increasingly, I mean, I played straight 5th edition D&D for 18 months at work.
Mm-hmm.
Straight 5th edition. Very, very limited house rules. Sometimes through exhaustion, I gave people hits when they just hadn't quite rolled right. But basically played the rules straight. And what happened after 18 months was that I had characters that were just unplayable. I mean, they had leveled up to a point where literally, and they had weapons, and there was the tank. He went and did the maximum damage. There was the bard. He did his thing. There were all these characters as a cleric, and all these there were characters throughout that just had leveled up to a point. And I thought, what's the next level here? Do they go in an astral plane? Are they fighting deities? I mean,
well, this is I can contrast this because when we finally got our great DM back in the day, and we started playing every Friday night, 5 hours every Friday night for a year and a half, plus the odd Saturday. So conservatively, somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 hours of play.
Yes,
we made it to 7th level.
Yes,
my dwarf still had a 17 strength, and he had a dexterity that was so terrible that at 7th level, he failed his dex check and fell off and ended up dying at a really awful point in the game. But
yes.
There was a couple of characters that were 8th level because at the time you had first edition has different amounts of XP for each class. So there were the thieves, of course, advanced the quickest. So I think we had an 8th or 9th level thief, and my fighter was 7th level, and then somebody had an 8th level cleric or something like that. But I wasn't a super being. I wasn't a demigod at 7th level. After 18 months, so 400 hours of play, I was 7th level.
I think it's got to do also with the kinds of conflict that you're involved with. Now, because of the way the work game was played, and because I was doing it with miniatures, and I had miniature rangers, and I wanted to tell a very particular story through it, there was a lot of battling. And we're going to talk about that sometime this evening. I have murder hobo down as a definite topic here. But there was a lot of battling. There was a lot of killing. There was a lot of meatbag, points, XP, orcs aplenty. And I even did the rules associated with increasing the strength and point values of the creatures as the levels increased, just to make it like remotely interesting. And I had it in the narrative. They started off with, very spongy goblins and orcs, and then they got into kind of more militarized goblins and orcs, and then they got into the elitely militarized goblins and orcs. And
goblins, gnolls.
Exactly. So
ogres.
I followed the narrative precisely, but it became mechanistic and boring. And I think, from my perspective, it became the satire of the worst elements of D&D. Now, for the folks that were playing, they absolutely loved it. It was a big thing because many of them were, there were a couple of power gamers that came in and tried to play power gaming stuff, but many of them were just complete novices. They were just coming in and having a good time. And that was wonderful in that setting. But, yeah.
You can make anything more gritty and more realistic. Like if you look at Top Secret SI, this is Special Intelligence, which was the 87 print, they had hit locations. So your arms, your legs, your torso, and your head all had a percentage of your total hit points, and you never got more hit points than when you started with. And if you got struck in an arm and you exceeded the number of points in that arm became useless. If you exceeded by double, the arm was basically destroyed. If you got chest or head and you exceeded it, you were unconscious or you were dead. Simple as that. Now, in Classic Traveler, you have your stats are your hit points. So if you did strength, dexterity, and endurance were maximum F or 15 each, the maximum hit points you could have would be 45, but you'd be a demigod at that point. You'd be this, you are the premium specimen of whatever. There are no higher values. And as you take strikes, your individual stats are reduced. If one stat is reduced to 0, you're unconscious. If 2 stats reduced to 0, you're severely wounded, and 3 to 0, you're dead. Now, explicitly in the rules, it says that even if you reduce a stat to below. Like if your strength was a 10, and you took 5 points on your strength, and it was reduced to 5, and you were swinging a cutlass, which requires a 9 strength to use. It says explicitly in the 1977-1981 rules, it says that the reduction doesn't affect your ability to do things. So when your dex is reduced, it doesn't affect your aim. When your endurance is reduced, it doesn't affect your ability to land blows. But if you wanted to make Classic Traveler gritty, then you could just apply the reduction to any of those 3 stats to affect your ability to aim. You get hit dexterity. Now your hand-eye coordination is gone and you can't aim well. You get hit in strength. You can't lift the big sword, or you can't carry the power armor anymore, or whatever. Right? You could do something like that. So that's a house rule that could be easily applied, and it would change the entire tone of the game. Traveler's already pretty deadly. When you get into combat in Traveler, and somebody's got a PGMP and it does 4 or 5 dice of damage, you're in big trouble.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because one hit and you're a smoking crater. It's the boots with just the wisp of smoke coming out of the top of the space boots, right?
Yes.
Most people don't like that kind of house ruling. They don't want to make it more gritty. They want to make it more fun.
I think certainly, Just Plain Chaos uses I hadn't, up until now, I actually downloaded the top secret PDF, which is actually a modern rule set, which is adapted from the 80s version. But Just Plain Chaos does have, as you say, finite location-based hit points and never increasing. So, never increasing unless a wound has been tended to, or these kind of things.
Right.
But that forces a strategic level of play, which actually, one of the things I find fascinating about the gameplay is that I will give my players time as they enter into a conflict situation to actually plan a strategy. And there are 1 or 2 people that have very particular strategic views. They are strangely, are not the ones carrying the beefiest weapons. They're the ones that typically are kind of midway through. But at the start of conflicts, they will always say, okay, we need to get together. We need to work out what the strategy is here. And I always give them that time, because that, while not necessarily being, simulated correctly, at least gives the improved gameplay and improved kind of sociability element, which I'd certainly want, irrespective of the deadliness of the rule set. I did want to talk a little bit about house adventures. That, I think, is a gateway. House rules are interesting because you need a certain degree of maturity of the players. But one of the things I did very early on was create, within existing rule sets, create my own adventures. And it was such an important thing as a child where, a module was 4 or 5 weeks worth of lawn mowing money. That even those things were incredibly expensive in Australia. So it's far easier just to get your, old used typewriter paper or whatever, draw together a few maps, put in a few, A, B, C, D, A equals, how many orcs or gold or what have you. Can you talk a little bit? Because, you created a planet and a bunch of adventures around that planet. You created a city within the planet. You created a social hierarchy. Can you talk a little bit about your early house adventures and as that matured, as your kind of gameplay interests matured?
The earliest house adventure I can remember, I actually typed out on my grandfather's Remington portable, and it was a horrible pastiche of all of the worst things that were available in dungeons. It was littered with traps. It was littered with monsters that had, endless quantities of gold and artifacts.
Yes.
It was I'll use the phrase that was popular at the time. It was a Monty Hall dungeon. Right? Let's make a deal. Come on down. Do you want what's behind number 1?
Yes.
Or you take the curtain. It was very much like that. And I was probably 13 at the time, maybe 14. So it's kind of 1980s, early 80s time frame, 1981. And I ran the guys through it, and everybody loved it because we didn't know any better. We didn't have any nuance. We just, the modules we'd played to date consisted of sort of B2, B1, maybe one of the A series, which was the start of the Slave Lords series, but nothing, or maybe X1, which was a basic module. And we hadn't developed any sort of real sense of consistency and narrative at that point in time. It was just why are you talking to my experience points? I've got to kill this thing and take its stuff.
Yeah.
That's the murder hobo scene. You're battling against a list of numbers on a page. There was no real cinematic description about what you were encountering or what was going on. It was very much a comparison of even cells on a spreadsheet. Well, my value of strength is higher than his value of strength, so I'm going to win all the contests of strength, etc. And but as we went on, my friend Mike, he developed a city for his own games, because during lunch hour at school we played alternately. We had different DMs playing D&D. So one day Mike would run his campaign, another day I would run my campaign in D&D, and then Brian would run his Traveler campaign during the lunch hour. So at least 4 days a week we played at school during the lunch hour, which was a full hour, and then Friday nights we would play 5 hours D&D, and then we would trade off and go to somebody's house, and maybe on a Saturday or Sunday we'd be playing D&D or some other game again. It was really obsessive behavior for us, but it kept us out of trouble. It kept us well-read. It kept us it occupied our time in what at that stage didn't seem particularly productive, but has in retrospect proved to be very valuable pastime. Because you're expanding your mind, you're acting. The joke about the resume, when you put down the resume, negotiated trade deals, organized large forces, and you put this all down, and it's all D&D stuff that you've done as year, rescue, and you vamp it up for your resume. But Mike had developed. He thought that he would like to have a city on his planet that was like a trading crossroads, center of knowledge and teaching, and everybody could come together, and it was sort of a neutral space. So he created a city called Jeru, which he based on Jerusalem, and he had all of these. He took the historical facts and created parallels that sort of fit in the races and classes in D&D, and he documented this extensively for his games, and it was. We spent more times doing urban adventuring with him than probably anything else. There were rare, if ever, we went dungeon delving or wandering around the wilderness. There was a lot of urban activity with his campaign. And I had worked on my own planet, and I developed the city of Cipher, and I developed all the environs around it. And I had the village of Barrowvale, or the area where Barrowvale was, and the local keep was on an island in the middle of the lake that was right next to the town, and there was a forest and all. I mean, it was brilliant to sit down and try and figure out how a planet would be come to be, or the features of the planet, and not do something that was completely insane, like a lake of lava right next to an ocean. You'd have to figure out the transitions, and you looked obviously at real geography and real chemistry and real physics, and you were trying to create something that was believable and engaging, right? And that was the key thing, was the engaging. If people looked at it and said, that's stupid, I don't want anything to do with that. I mean, this is insane. Why would I come back and play in this next week? But we learned that the aspects that we wanted to capture were things that were interesting and compelling. And how could we do that? How could we develop this? And making house adventures became really the modules fell by the wayside, or became just research documents where you would look through and find elements that you liked, maybe a building or a temple or a group of people in a cult or something, and you would lift that and insert that into your own in your own setting, and sort of blend the edges, like photoshopping at a macro level, right?
So many books of, worlds created through this period of time in my life. I only have a small subset of my books from this time period. I have one of the earliest when I was 11. I wrote a rule set based on my reading of Roman legions and, Roman conquest and these kind of things. And it's fascinating just seeing an 11-year-old handwriting, like really scruffy handwriting, large typeface, and just the amount of time, a full, 200 odd pages worth of this writing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of probably 50 of these books, and I have small smatterings. I wrote a rule set called Britannia when I was about 13, and we played this rule set for probably 2 years. And I think I've got that book somewhere. That's one of the ones where I was thinking I should scan some of these up and put them in the feed just to illustrate this thing.
It's not titled Rules Britannia, is it?
No, that was the joke. That was the joke.
Okay.
There was a subtle joke there. But that was based on from 600 to about 900 AD in the UK. I mean, obviously, you've got the Norman, Viking, you've got the Saxons, you've got the various other bits and pieces. But it was very much based on the notion that a peasant could, fight their way up at least into like some kind of noble court at some level. And it was actually very anti-magic. There was a period of time in my gaming where I thought actually the real world was considerably more interesting. It's funny, there's, what's it called? The Last Kingdom. There's a TV show on Netflix called The Last Kingdom, which captures this period perfectly, but obviously through a narrative. And it is fascinating to me that a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old in Australia could get this level of fascination associated with this time period in British history.
You're in school. You're doing all your assignments. You're trying to achieve some academic standing. You don't want to have low marks because you're going to end up with remedial work on top of that. So you have to maintain at least a respectable level of grades while you're doing all of this other stuff. And we had our backpacks. Well, it wasn't really backpacks at the time. They hadn't come into fashion, but sports bags, right? The Adidas bag was probably the iconic carry-all of the time. We were ripping the straps off of these things because we had so many binders and so many hardcover books stuffed in them that they were, I swear there were guys walking around with one arm longer than the other after high school. It was crazy. But as you say, magic, I particularly had a problem with the magic system in D&D. It just seemed, I know it's supposed to be based on Jack Vance's Dying Earth magic system, or what he describes. But I've read the Dying Earth, and I don't see it.
Right.
Rialto the Fabulous, Rialto the Magnificent, I don't see it translating into what I saw in first edition D&D. And I hated it. And I tried desperately to make, nobody wanted to play a magic user, because at first level, you had no armor, you had 4 hit points, maybe 6 if you were really, really lucky. There was another house rule for you. We had a house rule that at first level, you got max hit points. You didn't roll.
Wow.
So you couldn't really have a wizard or a mage with 1 hit point, even if you had a 14 constitution. So you'd end up with at least 4 and maybe 6 if you had a 16 or 18 constitution. But nobody wanted to play a mage. You had no armor. You had crap hit points. You had 1 spell if you were, and you could have a dagger, a dart, or a staff for a weapon. You were, and it came to be known, I guess, more recently, you were the torchbearer. You held the thing aloft, and you stayed out of the way so that you didn't get killed. And I hated that. You memorized 1 spell. You said at the beginning of the day, oh, what spell am I going to take? Well, I'm going to take Magic Missile. Because if you didn't take Magic Missile, the rest of the party would string you up.
Yes.
If you took Read Magic, you were as good as dead. They were not gonna forgive you for that. And so you took the spell, you memorized it, and then during the day, if that wasn't the one that was any good to you, you didn't use it the whole game. At most you could do, if you fired off a Magic Missile, you get a D4 damage. In basic, you had to aim, but in advanced, you didn't have to. You automatically hit. But I got so fed up with this, I said, I've got to do something about this. So I sat down and I actually wrote and had published in a real low-tier, nobody's ever heard of it magazine called The Frontline. I had a point-based spell system for D&D. I developed it using the existing rules. So each spell level was equivalent to a point. So a first level spell was 1 point, second level was 2 points, third 3, et cetera, et cetera. So your ability to get spells, if you looked at the table in the player's handbook, at first level you had 1 first level spell. At second level you had 2 first level spells. So I translated those to points. At second level you had 2 points. You could theoretically, if you could find a second level spell that you knew or could learn, you would have the enough points to cast a second level spell, which normally you wouldn't be able to do until third level by the rules. But because you were under level for it, you could burn up those points and have nothing happen. It was about a 50% chance of nothing happening and the points are gone, or a 50% chance of it going very badly for you and actually backfiring, not only using the spell points up, but causing harm to you or your party. And I documented the whole thing, and it was about 4 or 5 letter-sized pages, and sent it in and had it published. And I used that, and people would play a magic user because you didn't have to memorize something at the beginning of the day. If you had a spell list of first level spells that were, say, 7 in number, and you had 2 spell points, you could cast any 2 of those spells or any one of them twice during the day. And during your rest, you would recover spell points based on how many hours you slept. So at first level, second level, 2 points, you slept 8 hours, you would get 100% of your points back. If you slept 4, you get 50% back. So you'd have 1 point. You could still cast a spell after 4 hours. But you could pick any one. You had all of these in your head at any one time, and whichever was most appropriate, you could release. And oddly enough, in the later editions of D&D, they have spell points and spell slots instead of the memorization, the rote memorization, and the instant forgetting of the spell.
Yes.
And I published this in 1984, I think. 1983, 1984.
Certainly the recent biographies, I mean, there's a single biography of Gygax, but there are books around the history of D&D. They all note that he had the most trouble with the magic user as a concept. And it's interesting, actually, what you say, because that the nature of the magic missile, and in particular its use to immediately hit, and these are documented in terms of Gygax's history with his own problems, as you say, of playing a magic user. Like, it's just not something that people want to play in a game to start off with, and you end up either having situations where you need a bunch of NPCs to protect the magic user, or you need an NPC that is a magic user, and then people just play, regular fighters and what have you. But I wanted to change this just a little bit, because one of the things that interested me, the original Just Playing Chaos rules before I started playing them at work, and very much based on Australia in the 1990s, was, we talk about magic, let's move that aside, weapons were very difficult to get. And the original Just Playing Chaos rule set was based on very limited access to weaponry, very limited access to anything where you would engage with conflict because you would be immediately killed. And one of the things that I liked, certainly in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a movement towards really heavy narrative, sometimes they were called freeform role-playing games, where actual battling, conflict was very, very sparsely generated, and it was far more about role-playing, like in terms of just creating these roles and working out psychologies and ways of getting out of situations. And I think what you've described with regards to the murder hobo paradigm has changed a lot as well. Have you ever played like non-violent role-playing games?
I'm most of the purely narrative games I'm not a super big fan of. I don't know whether I'm just a grognard at heart, or my old school is just too strong to get into the diceless games or the narrative games. I have played episodes or scenarios of Top Secret, for instance, Top Secret SI. When I say Top Secret, I always mean that edition from 87.
Certainly.
'Cause the original one, as far as I'm concerned, is just an unplayable mess. I own it, but I never liked it. I've played entire scenarios where there's been 1 or 2 gunshots in the entire scenario. There might have been some fisticuffs, a little martial arts sort of action where you're trying to, you do that classic TV or movie scene where somebody comes up and hits you on the back of the head with the butt of the pistol or yes, with a, and it instantly knocks you out, but doesn't do any more damage. I'd love to be able to understand the mechanic behind that, because there isn't a mechanic that allows you to do that. You can either not knock the person out and they turn around and slug you, or you give them a concussion and send them to the hospital. There's no in between. They don't wake up 10 minutes later tied securely to a chair. I also played a variant of the Gumshoe rules, which I think was Trail of Cthulhu, at one of the local cons last year or the year before. And I don't think I picked up a die the whole game. I don't think anybody picked up a die the whole game. It was all narrative. And while it was a well-run, from the DM perspective, he did a really good job. The story was interesting. It was Cthulhu, and we all died horribly, and went insane and died horribly in the end, which is that's sort of the turnoff for me. And I think playing a straight Gumshoe game, that's the Robin D. Laws, writer and game designer Robin D. Laws, I think, did Gumshoe. And I think it would be fun to play with that rule system, because you pick up the clues. There's no rolling to find the clues. You always find the clues, and there's usually multiple ways to get the same clue. If you miss it in one section or one scene of the adventure, you will get it at some other point, because the object of the adventure is not to prevent you from getting the clues. It's to allow you to get the clues and for you to figure them out and then continue the story. And I think that'd be great. I'd love to play in a sort of a Gumshoe game. I'd even do Bubble Gumshoe, which is the kids' version. It sounds like a lot of fun. It's sort of almost a Scooby-Doo kind of vibe, right? I'd get away with it if it wasn't for you kids, sort of thing. But, Amber, Diceless, and other games like that, I don't really get. Fiasco or that sort of game. I need to have some interaction with the mechanics that is a random element, I suppose. It's not just, my stat is higher than their stat, so I automatically win. No, there has to be a chance. The underdog has to have a chance to win sometimes. I know in some games you can activate or invoke certain aspects of your character in order to gain advantage narratively. But I don't think I am sufficiently adept as a storyteller to weave that in without some thought beforehand. So it's going to be a real staccato, stuttery thing. Be smooth.
Card action is an interesting, without dice, but use of cards to promote actions where you can either strategically organize cards or these kind of things. I mean, there are many dynamics within here that are explorable without the use of dice. But I do agree, I think dice rolls are needed in almost all circumstances. But it interests me, the experimentation with role-playing that occurred in that time period, where people, particularly, I guess, in social groups, I mean, it would probably be a lot easier to have a Cthulhu, and Cthulhu is an interesting genre, because, yes, I certainly remember the Cthulhu-based no dice, no paper games. And, yeah, it is a fascinating mind space, because there, as you say, it's kind of interesting, dark horror. I like some of the First World War elements of the Cthulhu. Now, obviously, it's all polluted by steampunk and various other concepts too. So it's all now, the purest element that we're talking about here is all completely ruined. But before we conclude it, I wanted to talk a little bit about, and certainly when I write rules, when I think about rules, I think about player archetypes. And that, I think, is something that I have kind of 3 or 4 main player archetypes that I consider when I'm writing rules, to make sure that they all get different things out of it, but none of them are advantaged through their various behaviors. And when I put down archetypes in the notes, you thought it meant character archetypes.
Well, literary sort of things, like the hero, the mother figure, the villain, right? You meant something else, obviously.
As you described your first interaction with role-playing, the gentleman holding the book or magazine, looking in disgust, saying something, and then quickly going back to the book.
It's not a magazine, it's a game.
Yes. I have that archetype there, and it's funny, actually, at work, who falls into that category. It's funny when you have these archetypes, finding people that you interact with on a regular basis, who's going to fit into these archetypes here? And what I found fascinating in particular was we had an occasional player who only really played for a couple of games. But when she got involved, she completely dominated everything. And it was very strange because she even created house rules on the spot, which I'm normally like one character at particular times can pick and choose, and we kind of talk about, here's a mechanic. Sometimes I don't do it explicitly. Sometimes I just say roll a dice and I roll a dice. She said explicitly, what are the rules associated? She had a stone game that she introduced as a means of ripping off the other players from money. And she generated this rule set and then okayed it with me and okayed it with the players, and then proceeded to rip off one player in particular quite horrendously. So, I mean, you have all these archetypes of people. In order to engage in role-playing, I think you usually fit into a certain archetypes there. And what I find fascinating is you always have, and they're never the one that you would initially pick, but, the Dragonborn character, or be it the thief acrobat, the character that finds this very particular, thing within the sphere and then obsesses about it. You have the antithesis player, which I always really find very fascinating. I had one fellow I used to play with who would always play a female character that was exactly the opposite of him, and used this in some kind of strange... I mean, there's all the strange psychology within role-playing games as well.
To me, if we're talking about character archetypes, there is the murder hobo, which we've touched on, and all they're interested in is breaking in. They have no home, they have no background, their family is all dead, there's nothing the DM can do to hold them or incorporate them into the story. All they do is break into the dwellings of other creatures, kill them, and take their stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's what they enjoy doing. It's the amassing of a fortune or a number of entries on their sheet that they're interested in. It's very video gamey for them. It's the collection of, I have more stuff than you do, so therefore I win.
But it's my responsibility as a good GM in these circumstances to ruin their day in a very profound and exact way. I mean, I think my favourite thing, and I'll say this, it's about British soap operas, and I'm re-immersing myself in British soap operas for what reason, I don't know. But the thing in British soap operas is you take a character, you give them a defined goal, and you put every possible obstacle in their way between them getting to their defined goal. And I think there's an element that completely describes my view associated with, certainly from a GMing perspective, creating adventures and scenarios that will keep people, you create a goal and then mysteriously the characters end up going completely orthogonal to that. They're going in one adventure and then another adventure comes along. They're heading one way and then mysteriously, for some unknown reason, like there's wars. I love adding wars into adventures because then you have armies that are amassing that either the players are affiliated with or unaffiliated with, that are moving through the same space as the players. And sometimes they need to find allegiances with that. Sometimes they have to avoid them. Sometimes they have to find, various means of evading through this. So there are so many different twists and turns that you can keep the murder hobo archetype, if one exists in my description. They amass a huge amount of wealth. And then mysteriously they have to put it on a donkey because they've amassed a huge amount of wealth and they can't carry around the huge amount of wealth. So they get the donkey. Then something horrible happens to the donkey.
Well, you trade all the gold in for jewels, and then you can carry the jewels in a pouch. I mean, what's wrong with you? No, your interjection of war. When we were doing our 18-month campaign, when we emerged from delving into this keep, it was Windermere Keep, and we were down in the nether regions of it. We came up about level 5 at one point, and only to find the keep was actually occupied by a local lord who had an army, and he was trying to fight off because it was by a coastline, and there were ships and there were all sorts of things. And we came up in the middle of this, and they're like, "Who the hell are you guys? Where did you come from?" Well, this is our place. What are you doing here? No, we've taken it over on order of the Lord, and we're going to find out whether you're with us or against us. And eventually, we ended up, because we were higher level at 5th level than some of the intermediates in the military, we were actually brought in. We found out that, okay, this is a worthy cause and we've got to protect this area because we live in this area too, and it's going to be a big issue. We're going to lose our favorite village. We're going to lose our favorite inn. We're going to lose our favorite blacksmith, the whole shooting match. So we ended up being drawn into a much larger conflict, and the DM employed the mass battle rules, and we had siege engines, and there were trebuchets and malvoisins, and the whole shooting match. It was just, and he had miniatures for all this. We normally had miniatures even just to show our marching order. And I don't care if you don't use miniatures for anything else on the table. Bring something to represent your character, put it in order so we know if there's something going on, who's in the firing arc and whatnot. But injecting that into the game was really fun. It was something we had never done, which was mass combat.
Yes.
The sort of chainmail-y blend D&D battle system from BASIC, and some of his own melding that he did to blend the edges. And that's fantastic. I mean, talk about throwing everybody for a curve. We weren't expecting that, and it ended up being 4 or 5 nights solid of dealing with these mass combat and these ranks upon ranks of goblin kind from the bottom, kobold, goblin, orc, hobgoblin. It's usually one-on-one or small action with individual decisions made by the players. And we have a couple of guys in the area. I've got some of the warlord miniatures for their samurai test honor game, and I've got the BattleTech figures and stuff like that. So there are a few people that play skirmish level things, but I don't really hang out with anybody who does the sand table full of squads or companies of men acting en masse. And but I did find out there is a con in the area that happens once or twice a year that's heavily focused on wargaming in those aspects, and I'm planning to go this year. I just need to check the times and make sure I get to it.
My name is Tom Barbalet, and I have a problem with miniatures. I have a miniature problem which extends greatly. My wife would assert frequently that it borderlines an addiction, but my love of tiny little metal, and they have to be metal, the plastic ones just don't cut it, little metal figures, and the breadth and diversity of these things is an incredible problem for me. I would like to have a chance to discuss this in great detail with you, Chris Abbott, when we next talk. Thank you very much for a wonderful discussion this evening. Folks listening in, if you'd like to get in contact with Chris, rpgfan@bell.net is the way to contact him. Mine is Bravo Alpha Romeo, Bravo Alpha Lima Echo Tango, barbale@gmail.com. This is a word-of-mouth podcast. If you like what Chris and I are doing here this evening, please tell your friends, pass on the audio. Our conversations only get more, more, diverse and unique as they go on, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure this evening. Thank you very much for having the chance to chat.
Thank you for having me, Tom. I've still got pages of stuff here that we haven't covered.
Believe me.
And no doubt there'll be more.
Yes. Anyway, maybe next week if your furnace holds up. So look forward to talking to you soon, Chris. Take care.
Cheers, Tom.